There's a specific kind of person who grew up being told they were exceptional, and who now, as an adult, can barely start anything at all. Maybe that's you. Maybe you've got a half-written business plan sitting in a folder you haven't opened in 6 months. Maybe you keep saying you'll apply for that opportunity when the timing is better. Maybe you've told yourself you're being realistic, careful, waiting until you feel ready. But deep down, if you're being completely honest, the real reason you haven't started is this: you are terrified of finding out that you're not as good as everyone always told you you were. And here's what nobody tells you. That fear isn't weakness. It isn't laziness. It isn't a flaw you can fix with a better morning routine. That fear is the direct, neurological consequence of a childhood that was supposed to set you up for success. Potential is a debt you keep being asked to repay. And this video is about why. Stay with me. Because what you're about to hear is going to completely reframe the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. Let's go back. Because I need you to actually feel this first, not just think about it. Picture yourself at 9 or 10 years old. You come home with a perfect score. And the reaction from the person who matters most, it's huge. Warm. Proud. You're so smart. We always knew you were special. And something in your chest opens up. You feel safe. You feel loved. You feel like you belong. Now picture coming home with a B. A loss. A mistake everyone saw. The reaction is different. Not cruel, necessarily. Just different. Quieter. Heavier. Maybe just a look. Maybe a silence that lasted a beat too long. You didn't need anyone to explain what that silence meant. Your brain already knew. And here's the part that changes everything. Your brain is a historical organ. It doesn't just live in the present, it is physically built by the past. Every time that sequence repeated, succeed, feel the warmth, struggle, feel the distance, a neural pathway got carved a little deeper. Your brain wasn't just learning a lesson. It was becoming it. The lesson: love is something you earn. Safety is something you perform. And the moment you stop producing, both are at risk. Now, I need you to understand why that's so devastating. Because on the surface, it sounds almost reasonable. Work hard, get rewarded. Isn't that just how the world works? Here's what was actually happening underneath, that nobody ever explained to you. The brain of a young child cannot separate. They love what I did, from they love me. Those two things feel neurologically identical. So what your developing brain encoded wasn't. Achievement leads to praise. It encoded this: my worth as a person is inseparable from my most recent performance. Every test. Every game. Every recital. A live verdict, every single time, on whether you were still, fundamentally, okay. And repetition by repetition, your brain's reward system got calibrated to one specific fuel: external validation. Not the pleasure of learning. Not inner satisfaction. Someone else confirming that you were good. Which means your brain didn't just want that validation over time. It needed it. The way it needs food. And the absence of it didn't feel like disappointment. It felt like danger. Are you starting to see where the fear of failure actually comes from? Because it isn't where most people think it is. Now here's where the research takes an unexpected turn, and this is the part that stopped me cold. In the 1990s, psychologist Carol Dweck ran a study with 400 fifth graders. She gave them all easy puzzles. They all did well. Then she split them into two groups. One group was told, "You must be really smart." The other group, "You must have worked really hard." That's it. One sentence. And then she watched. When she offered both groups a choice, an easy test you'll probably ace, or a harder one you'll probably struggle with. Here's what happened. The majority of the smart kids chose the easy test. Think about that. The gifted ones, the confident ones, the ones who were supposed to be the most capable. They played it safe. Because when your intelligence is your identity, why would you ever risk finding out it might not be true? The effort kids? 90% chose the harder test. Because effort is always something you can choose to give. But intelligence is something you either have or you don't. And then, this is the part that's hard to hear. Both groups were forced to take a test designed 2 grade levels above them. A test nobody was going to pass. And when the smart kids failed, something broke. They assumed it was proof. Proof the label was wrong all along. They were, in Dweck's own words, sweating and miserable. They gave up. When the final round of easy tests came back around, their scores dropped by 20%. 20%. After one failure. The effort kids? Their scores went up by 30%. Let that land. The children told they were gifted, the ones whose entire childhoods revolved around messages of their innate specialness, performed measurably worse after a single setback than children who had simply been told they worked hard. Because for the smart kids, the label was never a foundation. It was a glass floor. And the moment it cracked, the only safe response was to stop moving. This is what psychologists call a fixed mindset. And it is the direct psychological product of a high-achievement childhood. When your value lives in your intelligence, in your talent, in being the smart one, failure doesn't just feel bad. It feels like identity collapse. Your nervous system responds the same way it would to any existential threat, with paralysis. So ask yourself honestly, how many times have you chosen the easy test? How many times have you stayed inside territory you already knew you could master, rather than risk finding out that maybe the label wasn't as airtight as everyone promised? Pause here for a second. Because what I'm about to say matters, and I don't want you to rush past it. The kid in that study who chose the easy test? They weren't weak. They were rational. They were doing the only thing their nervous system knew how to do, protect the one thing that had been told was their entire worth. That kid was you. And they were doing their absolute best. But here's something you probably weren't expecting me to say right now. The part of you that developed all of this, the perfectionism, the risk aversion, the constant scanning of every room for approval, was actually brilliant. Genuinely. Not in a reframe your trauma, self-help kind of way. In a literal, neurological, this was the right tool for the job kind of way. Think about it this way. Imagine growing up in a house where the heat only worked when you were performing. The moment you stopped producing, the room went cold. In that environment, hypervigilance to social approval isn't anxiety. It's intelligence applied to actual conditions. Perfectionism isn't fear. It's a rational response to a world where imperfection had real costs. Your brain didn't malfunction. It adapted. Brilliantly. The problem isn't the tool. The problem is that you've been carrying it into rooms where it no longer fits. You walked out of the house where the heat was conditional, and the tools you built to survive that house came with you. And they are still running, at full power, in an adult life where the thermostat no longer works that way. Now, think about a boy named Josh. 11 years old. Top of his class. Star athlete. Advanced in music. By every external measure, the golden child. His mother described him as everything a parent could hope for. But she noticed something that troubled her deeply. Every time Josh made a minor mistake, missed a free throw, got one question wrong, he didn't just feel disappointed. He disappeared. Collapsed into himself. Wouldn't talk. Could go hours without coming back. What was happening inside Josh wasn't complicated. His brain had been trained, through thousands of small repeated moments, to treat performance and safety as the same thing. So a missed shot didn't just feel bad. At a deep, pre-verbal level, it carried the emotional signature of something genuinely dangerous. The possibility of losing the warmth. Of not being enough. And his nervous system responded the only way it knew: shut down the rational mind, flood the system with alarm. Josh wasn't dramatic. Josh wasn't fragile. Josh was faithfully running the program that his childhood had written for him. And here is the truth that sits at the center of all of this. The children most celebrated for their gifts, the ones told most clearly, most often, that they were exceptional, those are the children who end up with the most fragile, most conditional, most easily shattered relationship to their own self-worth. The golden ticket was never a foundation. It was a cage. And the fear of failure you carry as an adult isn't a sign that you're not good enough. It's a sign that somewhere, a long time ago, you were told that being good enough was the only thing that made you worth loving. None of this is your fault. You didn't design your own brain. You were a child. You adapted to the world you found yourself in. The wiring isn't a character flaw. It's a survival record. And you can acknowledge that, fully, without minimizing it, and still decide that you're ready to live differently now. So, what do you actually do? And I want to be honest with you here. I'm not going to give you 5 steps to beat perfectionism. Because this isn't a productivity problem. What needs to change isn't your schedule or your habits. It's the lens through which you see yourself. 3 shifts. That's it. Not hacks. Not fixes. Shifts in how you understand what's happening. The first shift is this: stop measuring yourself in outcomes. Start measuring yourself in evidence. Not, I got the result, but I stayed with something difficult. Not, I nailed it, but I tried something I wasn't sure about. Your brain has spent decades building a case that your worth lives in what you produce. Every time you redirect that toward process, toward the fact that you showed up, that you tried, that you stayed, you are building a completely different kind of evidence inside yourself. Evidence that doesn't collapse the moment something goes wrong. Because no one can take away the fact that you tried. That evidence is permanent in a way that results never are. The second shift, and this one is practical in a way that might surprise you. The next time the fear arrives, and it will, don't try to push through it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Just name it. Out loud if you have to. I feel dread in my chest. I feel like I'm going to fail. That's it. Here's why that matters. The act of naming an emotion in specific words, not, I feel bad, but, I feel dread, engages the rational part of your brain and begins to quiet the alarm in your nervous system. Neuroscientists call this effect labeling. You might know it as, name it to tame it. Either way, it works. But the crucial part, the part that makes it more than just a calming technique, is naming it as a state. Something moving through you. Not a trait. Not a verdict. I feel afraid is completely different from, I am a failure. One is a weather report. The other is an identity sentence. And learning to tell the difference is the beginning of freedom. The third shift is the hardest. And I'll be honest, even knowing all of this doesn't make it easy. It's learning to stay inside the discomfort of not knowing yet. Every high achiever has an almost physical intolerance for the space between starting something and being good at it. And that makes complete sense. In the environment that built this psychology, being visibly uncertain, being a beginner, being not yet competent, was genuinely dangerous. That was the space where approval could vanish. So the brain built a powerful drive to skip it entirely. to perform competence before it exists. To either already know or not try. But here is what that drive has actually cost you. Quietly, steadily, over years. Everything genuinely worth doing lives in that uncomfortable middle. Every skill you have ever developed. Every meaningful thing you've ever built. Every version of yourself you're actually proud of. All of it happened inside the exact space your brain is most desperate to avoid. Not in the guaranteed zone. In the uncertain one. Learning to stay there, not to love it, not to be comfortable in it, just to stay without the confirmation that it's going to work out, that is not a small ask. But every single time you do it, you generate a new kind of evidence. Not, I was good at this. But, I survived not knowing whether I would be. And that evidence, built slowly, imperfectly, one uncomfortable moment at a time, is the only thing that can actually rewire what this video has been about. You know the two notes from Jaws, right? Done, done. You've probably heard them 1,000 times. And even now, even knowing it's just a movie, something happens in your body when you hear them. Your breath changes. Your attention sharpens. Your nervous system responds before your rational mind even registers what's playing. That's not weakness. That's memory. Encoded so deep it bypasses thought entirely. Your fear of failure works exactly like that music. When the blank page appears, when a real opportunity lands in your lap, when you're about to try something you're not guaranteed to succeed at, your nervous system plays a sound. A sound recorded a long time ago, in a childhood where underperformance was genuinely costly. Where the warmth of belonging was fragile in ways you never had the words for. That sound says, danger. Pull back. The last time you weren't enough, something real was lost. But here's the truth, the movie is over. Your nervous system is playing shark music in a swimming pool. And the shark isn't coming. You are not the same person who needed to earn their place at the table. You are an adult with choices and resources and perspective that child never had. And you get to decide, not once, but every day, in small ways and large ones, whether you keep organizing your life around avoiding that old alarm, or whether you let yourself move towards something real, even when the music starts. What version of your life becomes possible the moment you decide that your worth isn't something you produce? That's not a rhetorical question. I actually want you to sit with it. And before you go, one thing I want to leave in the comments. Not about your achievements. Not about your credentials. What is one thing you've been avoiding starting? Because underneath all the excuses, you're not sure you're good enough at it yet. You don't need the answer. You just need to be willing to say it out loud. Because naming it, as you now know, is the first real move. And if some part of this video gave language to something you've been carrying quietly for a long time, that's exactly why this channel exists. Not quick fixes. Not generic advice. The actual mechanics of why you are the way you are, and what becomes possible when you finally understand them. We'll see you in the next one.